this CNBC Africa special. We are at the Inward Buying Investment Mission. It is being hosted by the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency. It is in the lead up, of course, to the 15th BRICS Summit, which is just less than 10 days away or so. So the conversation that we're having this morning is how to increase the level of intra-South to South trade and how to ensure that the value supply chains that need to be adequate are up to par at this present moment in time. And the conversation I am having is with the lovely gentlemen who are joining me on stage. And this time I'm going to begin with the gentleman on my far right, Muzwetu Matema. He's the Group Executive for the Business Intelligence at the GGDA. Seated next to him, Mr. Stavros Nicolaou, the Executive Director of Aspen Pharmacare, as well as a representative of the South African chapter of the BRICS Business Council. And then next to him, Mr. Pravi Tripathi, Director for Ferrum Iron Ore, but speaking to us in his capacity as President of the India Business Forum of South Africa. And as I was saying, prior to that technical glitch, I do also have the chairperson of the Commercial Aviation Manufacturing Association, Mr. September. And we are here to talk about the strength of those value chains. And perhaps let's start off with what the picture of those value chains looks like right now. I think that the supply chain has been so integral and has been a focal point for most economies in the past 3 years, coming from the disruption of the pandemic and then the disruption of course, the war, and then some of our own internal disruptions here in South Africa being the challenges on our logistical line, which has made us difficult to get out and get in as many goods as perhaps we would desire. So, Mr. September, so if I begin with you as to the state of the supply chain right now, what is it looking like from an aviation point of view?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and good morning to all attendants. I'd like to just add another step backwards a bit.
Sure.
Before the pandemic, there was already we call it a lager mentality. This is probably a South African name, which is some grouping folding together or withdrawing that was happening in the marketplace, especially in the aerospace manufacturing space. So the pandemic only served to exacerbate that pulling back, people going back into their own spheres, well, their own countries really, and the so-called globalization, the effort to try and roll it back out of the international character of globalization to a more nationalistic approach. So that has been strengthened by COVID. And after COVID, also the recovery has not been equal in all sectors. I have obviously a little bit more authority in terms of my knowledge to speak about aerospace. In the aerospace, the South African environment has been devastated, to say the least. The combination of pulling back COVID and obviously our own situation in South Africa in terms of the public spend in aerospace and defense has meant that the survival of the industry is really on the line.
Sure.
But it's not on the line because of politics, but because of the supply chain. Okay. It is your subject, and I'd like to just say that in the space we play, aerospace, that's where really the geopolitics has the strongest influence in terms of viability, sustainability of manufacturing. I'd like to just leave it there. I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to expand on that.
Most definitely, and I'm looking forward to unpacking further what you meant by the holes in the supply chain in aerospace right now. But Praveer, just to your point, I think that the earlier this year, I get the dates wrong, but the whole world, or the BRICS grouping, I'm sure, was clapping essentially for India as it did surpass one of the largest economies in the world to occupy a spot in the 5th place, and a spot that it is comfortably enjoying right now. We also know that India is quite a significant market for South Africa, and that quite a a big Indian population outside of the country actually calls South Africa home. As you look at it, and just speaking with the hat of the Indian Business Forum, what is your experience as a business forum of the supply chain right now?
Thank you, Fifi. Thank you for having me here, GGDA. Good morning to everyone. Yes, we're on the path of becoming the 5th largest economy, and we are on the path of becoming the 3rd largest economy. I think within the 5 to 7 year period. So somehow, and I'm aware that there is a huge Indian origin population here in South Africa. It's the largest Indian population anywhere in the world.
Sure.
It is in South Africa. So the trade between India and South Africa in context with the BRICS, I think India is perhaps the only country amongst the BRICS nation which runs a trade deficit with South Africa, meaning South Africa has a trade surplus, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all. It's a very minor kind of surplus, but it's a good thing. And I've been talking about this in a lot of panel discussions, that there is so much more which could happen and which is not happening. And the intent is there to increase the trade. In terms of, so many things, collaborations could be forged in education, IT sector, agriculture. And this BRICS summit which is happening is actually, these conversations are being held in a very, very fruitful manner. I just saw a news today that there was some collaboration within the agricultural space amongst the BRICS nations, which is a very welcome and positive step. But coming back to your question as to the value chain between the BRICS nations, I think the pandemic did hurt the entire supply chain very, very negatively. And we are just coming out of it. We are seeing a bounce. The bounce is more prominent amongst the BRIC, if I may call it, leaving out the S. The S is kind of is lagging behind in catching up with the other BRICS nations. There are a number of reasons for it. I mean, we don't have the time and energy and space to actually go through each and every one. But these things need to be, discussed, and because the S amongst the BRICS has to contribute positively to this grouping. This grouping, I would like to see in the next 5 to 10, next decade, the BRICS not as a BRICS plus or whatever. It's a good welcome step. I mean, he's sitting right next to me. But I would rather see BRICS as a G5 in the next decade. And that would be the real, fructification of the entire idea of these developing countries coming together and challenging the established norm of G5, G7, and G20. And this grouping becomes the next G5. And that is something which I look forward to very, very positively. And I'm positive we can achieve it.
Okay. I noticed that you did get a couple of nods in the room when you expressed that vision. So clearly a few audience members on the same page as you in terms of ramping up the scale of the potential of BRICS. But you have said that essentially that potential might not be reached if the S doesn't do its job. So speaking on behalf then, Stavros, of the S in a BRIC, as a representative of the Business Council, speaking on behalf of the various sectors within the council, but also a sector that you know quite dearly, being your home sector, pharmaceuticals. Talk to us then about your view on the supply chain, and perhaps even a comment as to what Pravir did allude to in the S maybe bringing down the potential of the bloc right now, as it were.
Fifi, good morning, and thanks very much for having me, and good morning to all the viewers and participants. It's probably not by accident that I'm sitting behind the South African flag. Fifi, I was trying to work out how you got all this configuration going, but I now understand from your question. So there are a couple of aspects to the question that you've asked, and let me respond as follows. I think firstly, we have to recognize what is the value of the BRICS formation. It's a relatively new formation. And if you were to ask me as a business person, what is the attraction of BRICS, I would tell you the following. I think firstly, BRICS, as loosely as some might call it, as a collective bloc contributes 31.5% of global GDP. Now you can never underestimate that. It's just recently eclipsed the G7, which contributes 30% of global trade. The second thing is, these are developing and emerging markets. Okay, you can probably question whether China is still developing and emerging, but there are elements of China that are developing and emerging. And that is where the growth opportunities present. And that is why the S in BRICS is so important, because the next frontier of growth is going to be the African continent. So the S is not a small s or a capital S. It's very much a capital S that looks to integrate Africa into the equation. And incidentally, Africa has a population of 1.3 billion inhabitants, and that is set to double by 2050. So that will become one of the most populous regions in the world. And these are where the growth opportunities present. Now, growth opportunities can only be realized through partnerships. And that brings me to the next benefit of belonging to this club called BRICS, is that the diversity of the 4 BRIC partners, and if you add South Africa in that, and South Africa is a very innovative country. I mean, you said the medical industry is very close to my heart. It is. I live and breathe it all day long, Fifi. But, you know, we were the first ones to do a heart transplant. There are many firsts. We were first to genomically sequence the alpha variant the beta variant and the Omicron variants during COVID. So that is the other benefit. And all of these things interlink into backward and forward linkages, which is really the topic of conversation today. Mm-hmm. So let me just try and summarize by saying the following, that we are set as the S in BRICS to look at 3 immediate priorities. And this is the work of the Business Council. When you chair the council, you also get to a degree to determine what the agenda is. Our 3 overwhelming priorities are the following. Number 1, Africa continental free trade needs to be integrated into BRICS. Number 2, we've analyzed the trade patterns. And I'm going to disagree slightly with my colleague here. We run a trade deficit with India, regrettably. But this is not...
Is that new?
Yeah, and I've got the stats, yeah.
Okay.
But it's not really about who runs surpluses, who runs deficits. The benefit of analyzing trade patterns is you get to see what are the products you are importing, what are the products you're exporting. Now, I was amazed, and I'm not sure how many of our Brazilian colleagues and friends are in the audience. And if you are, bon dia. But our second biggest export to Brazil as South Africa is centrifuge machines. Now, who would have thought that? I'm sure 1% of this grouping would have understood that it's centrifuges. So that tells me something. It says we can sell centrifuges in China, in India, and in Russia as well. So trade deficits are about working out the patterns to see where the complementarities and strengths reside. And BRICS is all about leveraging scale, particularly economies of scale, leveraging a common mindset, and lastly, leveraging the complementarities. And the complementarities are what will give you those backward and forward linkages.
Okay.
Fifi, thanks very much.
Okay, no, thank you. So certainly not a small S, not an insignificant S, given its gateway potential, but certainly an S that perhaps can do a little bit more to really harness its gateway potential into the rest of the continent. Muzi, just your thoughts here. As the GGDA, you are an agency that is very important in not only growing the economy of Gauteng, but essentially the economy of South Africa, just given the size of Gauteng to the entire country. Your view then on the ground as to what is happening with companies that you're trying to take to the rest of the world and companies that you're trying to invite here into South Africa, as it does pertain to the BRICS trade relationship. What is going on the ground right now? What are you seeing by way of that supply chain and its potential value?
Thank you, Fifi. That's quite a complex question, but I'll just take a few steps back, like what all the other gentlemen have done, just to contextualize the heart of the matter. So Stavros gave a picture of, the BRICS region overtaking the G7 in terms of economic output a few months ago. So currently, the BRICS region versus the G7 is now significantly large. But what's also important, apart from contributing 30 to 32% of global GDP, the BRICS region now accounts for close to 44% of global manufacturing. And since this is a manufacturing discussion, I just wanted to contextualize it from that extent. And of course, manufacturing has shifted in the past 30 years from being concentrated in the US, in Western Europe, to largely concentrated in a very critical member of the BRICS region, which is China. And we as BRICS member states have benefited quite significantly. I mean, we've seen a very rapid shift in terms of foreign direct investment coming from Western Europe, North America, to China being a very dominant foreign direct investor in Gauteng as well as in South Africa. And this is quite important from a manufacturing perspective because whilst we contribute as Gauteng 35% of GDP, our manufacturing accounts for close to 50% of South Africa's manufacturing and close to 10% of Africa's manufacturing. And the foreign direct investment that we receive, 66% of foreign direct investment that we receive as Gauteng is from manufacturing. And if you look at the latest numbers, despite all the various challenges that we have as citizens towards how we feel about the country, self-esteem and perception issues, we are still the preeminent province in the continent in terms of receiving foreign direct investment. And a significant amount of that foreign direct investment is in the manufacturing sector. A good proportion is from China and from India and other sort of players. So that's just on manufacturing alone. And I'm just going to sort of like keep it at manufacturing. If we're to go to tourism, India, China, Brazil are significant drivers of tourism. If we're to go to various other sub-components. But at the heart of the matter, Fifi, what we do as the GGTA is really at the core face of facilitating the various challenges on one side that companies that come into the Gauteng City region face, but also sending companies to the rest of the world. So some of the challenge for companies coming in where we intervene on a face-to-face level is really the issue of how do we make sure that we've got specific regulatory measures and we communicate them very clearly. For example, most of the enterprises here would have had several challenges with, say, visa regulations that when they try and set up in South Africa. So we play the role of clarifying, fast-tracking all those regulatory bottlenecks. But over and above that, once you've set up here, you do need assistance with maybe your water use license at a factory. You do need some assistance with attracting a certain incentive from the Department of Trade and Industry. And we play the role of making sure that the statistics that I've spoken about, but also the quality of experience that one experiences when they are in the process of investing in Gauteng and taking advantage of the endowment and the gateway access that Gauteng offers has got a team of people that can assist you in that. So we play the role of hand-holding various investors from the region, as I said, but what we've seen is increasingly over the past few years, that investment and foreign direct investment has come significantly from the BRICS region. But over and above that, we also, the S in the BRICS is also a gateway S to the rest of the continent. Having said that, we are the largest African investor on the continent, but we're also the largest BRICS investor to the rest of the BRICS region in the continent. So you find, yes, there's Nigerian companies that invest in Russia, in China, in India, but South African companies by far lead the pack in investing in the rest of the region. As I said, and this doesn't negate the strength of investment that we do in all the other geopolitical regions. If there's one thing that we've been successful in despite the challenges, is really being in the middle of navigating changes in geoeconomic tensions and geopolitical tensions and still remaining relevant across all the geopolitical powers that now exist in the geoeconomic pressures. And we still continue to see that strength from a Gauteng perspective. And as I said, the complexity that we have as citizens is obviously navigating that against our own internal perceptions and challenges and what would call national self-esteem issues in light of the challenges that we do face as a country. But there's also the statistical reality of how endowed and privileged we are as a province, as a country, and our ability to attract investment, our ability to create those partnerships still remains head and shoulders above the rest of the continent. Thank you, Fifi.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So if we then stick to exactly what you're saying, we're focusing on manufacturing, we're focusing on the value chains. The purpose of this discussion then is to look at how we strengthen that picture right now. You, Mr. September, did mention some issues that you have with the supply chain right now. Perhaps as we talk about proposals for strengthening, share the challenge you have in the supply chain in the current aerospace manufacturing industry right now, as you see it, and what can be done for it to no longer be such a challenge, and what can be done for it to be strengthened?
Thank you. I did mention that it's a sector that's very much influenced in a geopolitical sense in terms of it being a sector that's most regulated for good reasons. You can't put a plane there and everybody does his own thing and the thing comes down. So it has to be regulated to make sure that the quality is there, what goes up there stays up there for the period that it needs to be up there. There's good reasons for that. There are also good reasons why the supply chain is organized the way it is, with tiered suppliers, with the OEM on top. All of those things are good. The weakness in our supply chain is the ethos. The ethos of the way that we roll out supply relationship is absolutely loaded in favor of incumbents, in favor of established players. Yes, traditionally we have been dealing with the majors in the western side of the space, which is basically Airbus and Boeing. And they've called the shots since probably not since I was born, because that's a long time ago, but for quite some time ago. And if you look at how they got to the space where they are, first of all the assets that they have were assets that were transferred from a war situation into a commercial situation. After that, they were backed by public finance in all sorts of subsidies, tax subsidies, R&D subsidies. In the American situation, a subsidy that falls out of American spend, DOD spend in military research that flows into the private sector and gets adopted there. So that's just the background upon which we're playing. Incidentally, also in Europe, you do have unequal scales in terms of the public sector support of the industry. There they call it a different name, they're not subsidies. They call it reimbursable financial incentives, RFIs. But these, as reimbursable as are, they are reimbursable when you're successful, which means it's sunken costs. We don't have access to that. Now, with the locked structure, which I said has a reason to be like that, and we don't have any quarrel with the structure as such. We have a quarrel with the ethos of that structure being rolled out. That's loaded in favor of incumbents. We're saying that BRICS is a wonderful, beautiful opportunity for us to actually remodel the structure of the supply chain in aerospace manufacturing.
Okay.
We must leverage BRICS to remodel that. You said this was being broadcast at CNBC, so I'm actually telling the Americans what they should be looking out for, which is not a good thing. For us, really, the merit in terms of trying to arrive at a situation where we can compete. Somebody is saying that we're very innovative. That's true. But if you look at our innovation, take the Roifalk. Roifalk is the helicopter that was unsuccessful in the marketplace. It was unsuccessful because it was loaded. It was using IP that didn't grow from this country and could be switched on and off.
Sure. So in that remodeling, what are you saying? Were you saying that there's opportunities then maybe to create further investments? Are you saying that maybe even some of the people in this room who are potentially looking at a next opportunity have something that they need to be looking further at in your space?
In fact, that remodeling should start right from today.
Okay.
From today, I think the thinking is actually not foreign, at least for people who are active in the space. But 3 of our on the BRICS are actually OEMs, and 2 are not. And if you look at South Africa not being an OEM, sitting with a thing like the Roifalk, which in principle is South African IP, intellectual property, incorporating technologies from other countries which can be switched on and off. This is an inequality that I'm talking about. The loadedness of the way that the supply chain is practiced in the commercial sense can make you absolutely, totally viable or totally unviable.
Okay.
At the whim of whoever is pulling the strings.
Okay. Pravir, for you, if we're talking about proposals to strengthen the current value chains right now, and I think you alluded to the expansion of BRICS. I mean, this is going to be a topic that we're going to be hearing a lot more about as the heads of state and the various government levels ponder on that. The currency, our finance minister of South Africa making references around the BRICS currency. Just last week, as that conversation heats up around de-dollarization and all of that. But as you see it, as just speaking on behalf of the Indian Business Forum, what needs to be done to strengthen the current value chain in your view?
Thank you. Firstly, if I've given the impression that the S in the BRICS is in small letter case, I want to, I'm telling you, the S is actually the largest S possible when it comes to the political ideology amongst the BRICS countries. South Africa is the youngest and the most liberal democracies in the world. And looking at the political groupings in the BRICS countries, ranging from autocratic, South Africa comes across as a breath of fresh air. So it's got its importance politically.
Are you not feeling pressure by the amounts of South Africans that are in this room to change
No,
your mind?
I'm not. And what we feel, I represent about 70 Indian businesses here, ranging from automobiles to pharmaceuticals. I mean, most of the APIs in South Africa, whether it's retrovirals or tuberculosis, are coming from India or sourced from India. And we are even supplying our friend, our colleague here, some of the APIs. So coming to, how does BRICS grouping can come together and help South Africa? I was discussing with my colleague here, Mr. Temba, about how South Africa somehow gets the short end of the stick. And it's not by, although we have a tendency to shoot ourselves in the foot, but sometimes, it's a much wider geopolitical issues which kind of prevent us from taking off. One of the things I have noticed is, some inaccurate statement, somebody sneezes politically and the rand goes up 10% up or down. I mean, how is it possible that a country the size of South Africa, its currency, its foreign, the volatility is just, it's not acceptable. And this is where, a formation like BRICS can basically come in and let's all get together. There are so many things, the constant agenda-driven growth. Okay, it could be good, but some of the agenda-driven growth is not actually conducive to let South Africa take off and take its place amongst the nations.
Like what?
Well, could be controversial, but, this whole thing, we are sitting on the biggest resource of coal, one of the biggest, and we are not utilizing coal, which can ease all the problems. I mean, the day we start, we are shutting down coal-fired power stations, it may not be politically, the best thing to say, but that's the shortest way to actually get rid of this problem. We don't have to import diesel. We have got our own coal, and we can mitigate the power deficiency which we are having. So those kind of things, and I don't think that these agendas are not driven by South Africa itself. These are globally driven agendas, which is having a very deteriorating effect to South Africa. We are not the biggest carbon emitters in the world. Okay, it's been made to look like we are the biggest carbon emitters in the world, but that's not the case. We are hardly, I don't have the statistics, but how much we are producing, our installed capacity is close to about 45,000 megawatts in coal-fired power generation, which is not even 1/10 of, what India and China or the other BRICS countries are producing. I mean, it's nothing, hardly anything. But we have to take a stand as to what is in the best interest of South Africa. And I do see that if we take that kind of stand, and if the other BRICS countries, we come together, then there is nothing which can stop the BRICS as a grouping and South Africa as a nation in outperforming all the in all the other parameters.
Sure, no, you are right. That is a controversial one. I know there are conflicting views around the energy transition and who transitions at what pace and who needs to do what as a biggest emitter and who needs to do something else. But the point that you did make around some of the misalignment of the politics is well noted, notwithstanding perhaps the complexities and the controversies that may exist in trying to push ahead there. Stavros, just your take. Feel free to comment on the issue of sustainability, but honing back to strengthening the manufacturing value chain for business within the BRICS cluster, what would you say needs to be done to ensure that?
Fifi, firstly, manufacturing over the last 100 years has been the cornerstone of growth of any economy. So if you look at post-World War, Japan, what did Japan do? What did Germany do? They built up these formidable economies by industrializing. And it's the same thing in our country. I mean, we face the challenges, the headwinds are all well recorded. I'm not going to go through all of those. Suffice to say that one of the best ways of addressing unemployment in our country is through the manufacturing sector and through, some people call it reindustrializing, others say you're going to industrialize some sectors for the first time. So whichever you may choose. And here, I need to speak a little about policy cohesion. For me, the single most important lever for both growth and industrialization is our ability to leverage our public sector spend. And it's opportune that the Deputy Minister walked in as I'm making this point, because DTIC are great proponents of this. So our spend is 1.2 trillion rand. The majority, that's annual spend. So if you take it over a 10-year period, there's 10 trillion rand that can be leveraged for localization in our country. But it requires a careful cohesion of policy, cohesion and coordination, both. And I'm afraid we're not optimizing that opportunity, because that will give, firstly, black entrepreneurs an opportunity to come in. Because right now, if you're a black entrepreneur in our country, very difficult to go and access capital, because the banks are going to ask you, have you either got collateral or have you got off-takes? And you have neither, I'm afraid. Okay, some do, but the majority don't. So that's the first thing, is we've got to leverage that, as other countries have done, both on our continent and around the world, to say we are going to better leverage this, to give off-take, so that when you go and sit in front of a bank, you're saying, well, I have an off-take of 500,000 packs of medicine a month, or whatever the number is, provided I meet conditions A, B, and C. Then you're going to have a much more constructive discussion with the bank. The second thing is partnerships are important. And this is where I see the single biggest opportunity within BRICS. We're diverse economies, we have diverse innovation capabilities, and we need to harness the strength of those. So, because I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, Fifi, and you referred to this earlier, of course, India is a formidable pharma global player. By volume, the largest at the moment. But there are products that we produce in our country that we can export globally. And I speak about my own company, Aspen. We are the world's leaders in general anesthetics. Who would have expected that? On the tip of the African continent, #1 in the world in general anesthetics outside of the United States. And this is what I'm saying. Industrialization is key to solving unemployment, poverty, inequality. And there is pervasive unemployment, inequality, and poverty in all 5 of these markets. It's not just in South Africa. India's come a long way. India's a miracle. China's a miracle. But when I go and visit our plant in, for example, Rio de Janeiro, so we have very common characteristics. And manufacturing industrialization can catapult all 5 of these BRICS economies to the next level. But it does require, just to summarize, 2 things: careful coordination of domestic policies to give you economies of scale and volume so that you can be globally competitive. Because the DM here will tell you it's no use having artificial competitiveness. Anything we do has to create global competitiveness. And my second and final point is we need to use the BRICS partnerships, whether it's technology transfers, know-how transfers, whatever it is, to strengthen localization, playing to the different strengths of the different countries, anchored or underpinned by complementarity.
Okay. I see you agitating to come there. I don't know what he was saying that that hit a note. I'm going to open up the floor to questions in just a short while. Can I just get an indication of who does have a question maybe or a comment to the panel? Okay, there's a few. So we're going to take a few questions. And before we take the question, just Muzi, an opportunity for you to also give us a sense of the companies that the GGDA does work closely with and does support right now. What are their asks from you about what needs to be done to strengthen this value chain that they're supposed to participate in as manufacturers? And similarly, some of the companies that you're trying to attract into the province, what's their request on that regard as well?
Okay. So firstly, manufacturing, broadly speaking, is about 10 subsectors in it. Sure. And each of those subsectors have got different characteristics and different opportunities. I'll start with the auto sector since we're speaking of value chains. One thing that we have done tremendously well in Gauteng is attract quite a significant amount of the world's most prominent OEM players. We've got BMW, we've got Mercedes, etc. But since we're speaking of value chains, there's been quite an exciting shift and shock happening in the auto sector that we've all witnessed, which is the reconfiguration of the auto value chain from a combustion-based engine, which was predominantly made in, say, Western Europe, some made in Japan, some made in North America, to this new exciting version of the vehicle, which is made by electric components. And that value chain has dramatically shifted to a BRICS member state, as well as the raw materials are drastically found predominantly in the SADC region. So when we speak of shifting value chains, we're going to experience this in the next 4 to 5 years, where suddenly China, for example, now accounts for 50% of the 60% of the world's lithium battery manufacturers. I think the top 5 lithium battery makers in the world are now Chinese. The largest OEM that makes electric vehicles is now Chinese. So those are the shifts in the value chain of the auto industry that we are seeing. There's also policy dynamics that come with the shift, but at the heart of it is really the decarbonization of the electric vehicle. So what we then need to do as a country, as a province, is to be alive to those shifts in OEM sort of capabilities. So whilst we've positioned ourselves as a prominent exporter of the ICE engine, what do we need to do to make sure that when we move to the next step of being a prominent exporter of electric vehicles, how do we incorporate our own enterprises, particularly enterprises from previously disadvantaged orientations? So that means Stavros spoke about a policy deliberate collaboration, so that we need to be alive to that. What we've done with the ICE engine, where we're quite successful, we were able to basically use our capability through one of our subsidiaries, through the assistance of the AITC and the incentives that we give to the auto sector, to basically be able to create quite a strong, what can I say, molecule of black enterprises that feed into major OEMs. There's various of them that you can that have been incubated by ourselves, that are now suppliers of Ford, that are now suppliers of bumper engines in BMW, that supply indicator lights to Mercedes-Benz that go to the rest of the world. And perhaps maybe we are at fault as the public sector that we don't talk about how capable we are as an African state in doing this, that no one else does, that there's Fords that are driving in America right now that have bumpers that have been produced in Gauteng, that there's BMWs moving throughout the rest of the world that have indicators that come from our country. And that's how you deepen a value chain. Sure. You become deliberate in making sure that there is mechanisms that are catalytic to making sure that your own enterprises are part of that. So that's the first part of answering your question. I zoned in deliberately on the auto sector. But what we do, in fact, what part of my day job is at the GGTA as an economist working in the public sector, is to really take the time with my team to analyze where the opportunities in these lie. So, for example, in India, we have a methodology that we use as economists. I won't get into that. So India is a big market for diamonds. They hardly make any diamonds. Most diamonds that are made in the world come from the southern tip of this continent, whether it's Botswana or ourselves or Namibia. So there's an opportunity through mineral beneficiation to export processed diamonds to India, because India is a big player in that. And part of the program that we have at Gauteng is a very aggressive program on mineral beneficiation, particularly jewelry manufacturing. In fact, I'll be leading a delegation of some of the enterprises here to the Ora Tambo Special Economic Zone, where we have a jewelry manufacturing processing plant that does exactly this. But to cut to the chase of it is, there also is a concerted effort that public agents such as myself have to play in making sure that we're quite aggressive in identifying those opportunities. In preparation for the summit to assist the work of the BRICS Business Council, we've been able, across all the 5 BRICS countries, to identify very specific products where there is opportunity. So, for example, there's an opportunity to double the amount of apples that we export to India, based on the analytic method. To Brazil, there's quite an exciting opportunity to increase the amount of ferrochrome exports threefold, because this, as much as people might not know it, South Africa has got a very strong organic chemical and ferrochrome processing manufacturing capability. So those are the small that, so when we speak in aggregate, people say, well, only 1% of our exports are with Brazil. But when you break it down, you find that there's one product where we account for 30% in the world to Brazil.
Sure.
So that's where the opportunities to really expand and drive inclusive industrialization lies. And that's where agencies such as myself, the work that the DTIC really play a critical part of trying to solve the puzzle.
Sure, and platforms like this,
Yes.
to the point of spreading the information about what is available and where the opportunities are, platforms like this.
And maybe I realize I didn't actually answer your question. So to answer your question on what are companies actually saying? So, I mean, the conversation is real and alive, and it happens in real time. But we create platforms such as this so that we can get as much moving information as possible on what the challenge is. So what our expectation from creating a platform such as this inward buying mission between BRICS buyers and Gauteng enterprises is to get more of the real-time data of what the challenges and the opportunities that the companies themselves are picking up, more than the statistical stuff that we talk about. Thank you, Fifi.
Sure, got it. And thanks for answering the question there in its totality. So we have got time for around 2 questions or so. The mic is at the back, so perhaps if we could just start with the gentleman right there. If we can just keep the questions quite brief so we can get as many through as possible.
Thank you. I work in the manufacturing sector, and we focus very strongly on localization of manufacturing, and for that matter, depending on your perspective and your point of view, decentralization. Value chains, automotive, aerospace, they often contain many, many steps. And along these steps, there's a lot of potential for optimization of the value chain, reducing costs for both the suppliers and the buyers, by localizing or decentralizing manufacture. How are we ensuring, and I welcome any of the members of the panel to answer here, how are we ensuring that there's a continuous sort of heartbeat to identifying those opportunities and those low-hanging fruit of breaking down those little steps of the value chain and continuously identifying where we can improve the efficiency, financial or otherwise, of those components? So as an example, in the automotive industry, we're localizing a lot of manufacture of components. Is there initiatives that continuously refine and take a look and encourage that sort of development within the member states?
Okay. We'll take another question. It's a lady seated there. Hello.
My name is Gugu Kati. I'm representing young women and young entrepreneurs, obviously, in South Africa. So I think the issue that we have been having as a nation, I'll speak for the small s, we've been coming up with old solutions to old problems. So I think it will be very strategic of us to start coming up with actual new solutions. So my question is, the one thing the BRICS countries have in common is high trading costs in the stock market. So my question is, with all the minerals and resources all the BRICS countries have, would an African stock market not be a solution to an old problem?
Okay. We'll take one more, and we'll allow the panel to respond. We'll unfortunately have to pay our advertisers, so we'll be wrapping up the live broadcast. And as soon as that's done, we'll continue with the Q&A. So we'll just take this one question here.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Javier, so I'm representing an organization called SAPMA, South African Black Mining Association. I believe in your 9 working groups, you have really not prioritized the mining sector, and mining is really contributes so much into the economy if you're looking at to our as South Africa, because of the resources. You're looking at most of the commodities that we do trade. You're mentioning coal, we are in the coal industry. So what I wanted to maybe ask with regards to one of the agenda on BRICS 2023, which is basically inclusive multilateralism. How do you able to ensuring that you allow, especially on the side of governments, because I believe one of the issues is the barrier to entry markets or to newcomers. We work with a lot of junior miners, and one of the challenges is basically has to do with mostly the policies when it comes to trade. And I like because FCTA's agenda is to focus also on to understanding how to able to deal with the issue of barrier to entry to new markets. How do you then able, maybe that question can also be answered by any of the panelists, how do you ensuring that you're able to edge that gap of the skewed multilateralism, especially when it comes to the trade policies? I believe that our policies or many of the red tapes that we have in South Africa, really some of the members of BRICS, they don't have those challenges because maybe of the bilateral agreement they have with their own states, heads of states, with our government. But with us as South Africans, we really find it difficult to ensuring that we're able to trade with our members of BRICS. And because of our own government who has really red tapes when it comes to, I can mention even to the industry of manufacturing, SABS. As an SMME, we also have the Innovation Hub, we have incubation, we deal with SMMEs. Very difficult when it comes to complying with the SABS. We understand the quality, the standardization, the standard, but also the money that is required. Let's deal with the issues of really better to entry markets that created by our own government on red tapes, how to ensure that we ease those challenges when it comes to the red tapes that the government has not able to, if you were to say, able to really eradicate. Thank you.
Okay, are you sure you want an answer to that one? It sounded like you asked the question and you answered it yourself. Great response, by the way. If we just take, can I ask Muzi actually if you just take this one answer? Yes. We're going to wrap it up in terms of the live broadcast, but we'll continue engaging if you don't mind. Just regarding the question around the continual work that is being done right now to efficientize the value chain, what can be done around the localization the strategy, just how much of a moving piece it is, as it were, to strengthen the value chain.
I'm going to reply to the question the way I understood it.
Sure.
To say what is being done in terms of the continuous work that is required to, I guess, to be on the edge of making sure that the value chains are realistic to the market. Yep. I think there is, obviously this is a moving target, but there is quite a few bodies over and above what the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition and its universe, by its universe I include ASSET, GGTA, and the various other agencies and export councils. But there's other bodies such as the Manufacturing Council that do play a role in this. But we also do concede that there are sort of like policy shortfalls. But also what we have to be also alive is the fact that some of these really have to be driven by the animal spirits of entrepreneurs themselves to move the dial forward. Because at the end of the day, bureaucrats and government technocrats will not be always as responsive as to the actual owners of business and the people that have taken the actual risk to unlock an opportunity.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, it feeds back to the whole point and importance of platforms like this, to get feedback such as that, to be able to take home to perhaps some of the policymakers who can make the decisions. But we are still continuing on this platform here in Gauteng, where we are building up, of course, to the 15th BRICS summit that will be taking place right here, in fact, in the heart of the economic capital of South Africa, as well as the rest of the continent. We're unfortunately bidding farewell to you as our viewers of this inward buying and investment mission that's taking place. And we do look forward, of course, to bringing you further conversations as it does regard BRICS and the policies that will be discussed, and also the proposals that will be tabled around accelerating partnerships between BRICS, the rest of the continent, ensuring that the partnerships translate into sustainable development as well as increased multilateralism. But to our viewers, thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back with you real soon.